I remember when I went to college, and I had like grew up with my family, my parents, until I was 18 and left. I mean, I'd go away for periods of time, but nothing so concentrated and away where I was also eating every meal with other human beings who had come with their own habits, right? Their own eating habits. So that I'd see the same person every day eating 3 meals, and then I would look at their body shape and size. And I remember seeing people eating things like pasta or just kind of normal, I don't know, eating habits. And I was like, how are they not really heavy when they eat that way? And, I grew up in a family that had very particular and sometimes odd eating habits. And I absorbed those and thought that was normal. I mean, I did very abnormal things that I was aware were not normal, so I'm not putting that on them. But I also watched habits and carried those habits out into the world, and then those habits contrasted with what I was seeing, and I was like, oh, that's one way of doing it. That I thought was the only way of doing it. And then all of these different people with all these different body shapes and sizes who have, these eating habits are kind of appending what I was shown. Mm-hmm. I would say in my family, people did use food as a way to manage feelings or manage things, not eating too much, any combination. And I watched both happen. I didn't have parents who were drinkers. I didn't have, parents who used drugs. And so I did not become a drinker, that was not my thing. But I do think if you are schooled in ways to manage feelings based on what you watch people around you do, naturally you're going to go to that because that's what you've learned, And so I always wonder with the question of heritability, it's spoken about, I hear heritability and I think biological, genetic in the brain. Mm-hmm. But is that the case? Because I would argue, in my instance, I don't know if my parents had a biological predisposition to managing food the way they did. Who knows? They both came from families where each of their parents had come from dirt poor families or had themselves been dirt poor, and food was, not around a lot. So you can see what that's going to do to people's relationship to food when, you have to eat pigeons on roofs to survive, So I inherited their patterns of eating that could have just been cultural adaptations gone awry, or whatever. So is heritability, what does that really mean?
Right. Heritability, I don't think we know yet. I think there's, the Angie study? It's a huge genetic study. Cynthia Bullock is heading it, and she's at Chapel Hill. Huge study. I think heritability, the last stats I saw were really wide. It was posited somewhere between 35 and 75%.
But what that means?
I think what that means is the closest we've gotten, to the best of my knowledge, is that we have identified a gene on which there are 3 characteristics that might predispose an eating disorder. So, not all genes get expressed, right?
What are the characteristics?
Anxiety, perfectionism, and obsessive compulsive traits. So, the model for treating eating disorders, overarching model, is that we look at it as a bio-psycho-social. Right? So you have to get the whole picture. So it's not just heritability, it's nurture and nature.
Right.
So those experiences, consider a person who had a predisposition to be an anxious, poor attachment, maybe anxious, fearful, predisposition to anxiety, and then there was a perhaps childhood trauma. Right? So you're genetically loaded, and then your environment's giving you something to ruminate and worry about, and all of a sudden the eating disorder comes in and you think it's saying, I'll keep you safe. You feel so chaotic and confused. I've got all these rules about what you should eat. So it gives the child something to distract.
Right, and it organizes you.
And hope, gives them hope. Well, I'll be safe now.
Right.
So heritability, I don't think there's any way it can't be both.
Right, exactly.
It's not an eating disorder gene.
Yeah.
It's a gene with predispositions to those three things.
Right, and those three things aren't eating disorders, and it's very possible that those, in other words, perfectionism, anxiety, and what was the third one?
Obsessive compulsive traits.
So, I mean, that could come up and play out in different ways.
Absolutely.
But then if you're in an environment where people are using a particular substance or behavior to manage those three things,
right,
you may then gravitate toward that simply because that was what you learned, that was what you saw.
I believe that with the same set of genetic predisposition, that the environment being different can lead someone to form an eating disorder and another person to develop obsessive compulsive disorder.
Exactly. That's what I think I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think it depends on the environment.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean.
And the interpretations of the environment. Personally, I think we should teach emotions in school.
Agreed.
Because you just said a little while ago, we learn. Parenting has changed in the last 100 years. Not all of us have time to stay home and make ends meet with just one job. And so there is less time at home to teach our young children about emotions and emotion management and self-esteem. And so it's got to come from school. And yet school has so much to get in about science and history and English that they don't really have time either.